So the top three are Germany, UK, and France for top three cheating husbands in the world. 55% of French men acknowledge being unfaithful to their spouse or significant other. Cheating is so common in Paris that French flower shops advertise, "Don't forget your mistress." Lovely.
Wow.
Very good. Hey, welcome to another edition of the I Just Want This Done Divorce podcast. I am your host, Raif Palmer, with co-host Rahul Iyer, and we're here to talk about the stuff we love to talk about. We've got divorce stuff, we've got celeb stuff, we've got dating apps, we've got dating trends. We are loaded and ready to roll here, and excited to bring this to you. Also, some hardcore divorce stuff like we always like to talk about. So Rahul, let's launch off here. Let's blast off and talk about Jason Momoa. Aquaman, am I right? Am I wrong?
Aquaman, also from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And, fresh off, I got my Michigan shirt on, fresh off of the national championship. I don't know when this episode's going to air, but we're fresh off of it. Take my word for it.
All right. Well, congratulations to your team. But I went to U of I at Champaign, so I can't cheer on Michigan. Although I guess since they're Big 10, Big 11, Big 13, however many teams, I can be excited because at least that group won. So that's good. So tell me about the information about Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet's divorce.
Yes. So Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet are officially divorced. It sort of came from left field, and then the news reports that the day after it was filed, their divorce was granted. So you might wonder, how the heck did that happen? First step is we're informing you that they're divorced. It was very amicable, as you often hear with these sort of things. Number two, how does a divorce get resolved in one day? Well, everything is done before the filing, right? So they negotiate everything, they get everything done, keep the lid on it, and then they say, okay, we're filing for divorce. The case is filed. Powers that be are there farming these things, mining these things. And they say, oh, well, Jason Momoa is getting divorced. And the following day, they're like, wow, the divorce is settled. That's because to actually finalize it, you do have to file a case and get it signed off by a judge. So they would have resolved everything. We don't know if it was weeks, days, months of mediation to get everything done, or how else they kind of had a meeting of the minds here for this. And then eventually they decided, okay, we have a full agreement. Let's file for divorce and get it done so that they're not having their divorce in the public eye. We have some information about the actual terms of the divorce. It says that according to the marital settlement agreement, or MSA, they each are fully satisfied with regard to the disclosures provided, and quote unquote, they are sufficiently knowledgeable about the terms of the MSA, the value of the assets divided between them, and the incomes of each of them. Now that sounds a little familiar, right, Raif?
Yeah, that's like generic language right off of the settlement agreement. And then, a lot of times you'll hold the balance sheet, or the division of assets and debt will be held out of the public record. You can keep a lot of the details out of the public record if you do it right as a divorce lawyer. So not a surprise that this stuff is on the down low, right?
Right, exactly. And it says they're both awarded joint legal custody of their two kids, and they are equally responsible for the children's health, education, and welfare. And at this time, no child support arrangement or agreement has been put in place. We also see that it says they'll share the living expenses of the two children, and if one parent decides to travel with the kids, that party shall be responsible for the children's expenses for such trips. And they've also both waived their right to seek spousal support from one another. And it's a permanent waiver. It seems pretty straightforward. There's a lot of documents that we see. It's nothing convoluted or complex that, we've come accustomed to with some of these celeb divorces, so to speak.
Yeah,
this is fairly benign.
Right. And when people say, well, how is there no child support? Well, you just heard Rahul say, well, they agreed to split the kids' expenses, and that's why there's no child support. If the court sees that there's adequate provisions for the child, the court will allow a reduction of child support to zero, or what they call a reservation of child support. And this is all very state specific. But in our state, you can't waive child support because it's the child's right to be supported. The court's looking out for the best interest of the child, so you can't make it go away, but you can reserve it or set it at zero, and it's always modifiable. So theoretically, if somebody stopped chipping in on the expenses, the court could whack them with a child support order. So not unusual that there's no child support here. They're agreeing to split the expenses. By the way, looking at the picture in the article, who has the prettier hairstyle? Is it Momoa or Lisa Bonet? Not clear.
It's a close,
not sure
it's a close one. Yeah.
Jason has beautiful locks.
Yes.
But is Lisa Bonet older? She's not a kid, that's for sure.
She is older. I think she's 56 and he's 44.
Oh, okay.
That's great for 56. I'll tell you that much.
She looks great. Yeah. I thought she was about my age. So any information about whether they have a prenup?
It doesn't say. No, it didn't say. We'll see if it does or not. Typically they do like to mention prenups in these articles. So
Yeah.
The fact that they haven't mentioned it is something. They were also separated for about 4 years now. They were separated, or 3 years,
wow.
3.5 years. They were separated on or about October of 2020. And so, although this comes from left field because, like, why now? Why all of a sudden? I mean, they are separated, so you kind of think that there is some end game here. So
yeah, and like you said, this could have been going on for months or a year plus of negotiations. Yeah, who knows?
They could have already divided everything and then said, you keep what you have, I keep what I have. So that could have already happened.
Right. We don't know their asset and income situation, so hard for us to say. Sounds sort of like a walkaway deal, but we don't know about prenup or no prenup or what their deal was. So hard to say. But they did it right in terms of this is very private. Most of the details are private. Joint custody. So all the nice things that we like to see definitely here and no big World War III litigation. So good on them for sure. So another one that I think is worth talking about briefly, we're in our celeb news thing, is the ongoing Britney Spears, Sam Asghari saga. What's going on with that? Dog custody thing?
Back towards end of last year, there was this issue with the dogs. I think Britney Spears and Asghari had 4 or 5 dogs together, 5 dogs in total. The big question or issue was her position that he can't have any of the dogs. She wants all 5 of them. And so that was a dispute. So the article says that about end of August of 2023. So we're mentioning it now just because, we are. But they finally reached resolution for that dispute. He gets one of the dogs, a Doberman Pinscher that he bought for her quote unquote security. And then she gets the other 4 dogs. And so they say that she's pretty happy with that. She is content with the deal and how the dogs were split. Initially, she was refusing to give up custody of any of her dogs, and he got the Doberman. So that's kind of how it is. But I think this is interesting because, we can sort of talk about how pet custody is dealt with and also how it has evolved. They used to be treated as chattel or property, right? And maybe we'll cover this on a different day, but essentially it's now they're sort of quasi, at least in certain jurisdictions like Illinois, for example, quasi properties. So you can technically have a visitation schedule with a pet, even though the pet is kind of considered property.
The thing that I think is significant here is, first of all, the divorce is still going on, right? They haven't resolved everything. Okay.
That's my understanding, yeah.
And they don't have kids, so basically they've just resolved the custody of the quote-unquote kids, right?
Right.
Okay. So we've got the financial stuff left to do and all that. So who knows how that's going to shake out, but good step here for them. But like you point out, and certainly we can only really speak to Illinois, but in our state, like you said, animals were just property like a TV set or a piece of furniture. Sorry to you dog lovers, but that's how the law was here. That wasn't unusual among the states, but our law changed not too long ago to not really change it to pet custody in the way that children have custody, but to create a little bit more protection for animals in that when there's a dispute, the court can allocate animals considering the best interest of the animal. So it is sort of like a standard best interest of child concept. The court is able to then, decide who gets awarded the animals, not using a property standard, which is like basically a value standard, like how much is it worth, but more of a holistic, who's going to be the better person to take care of this animal concept. So the animal rights advocates in Illinois in the family law bar and other folks pushed for this change in the legislation, and they were successful and got this sort of hybrid. There were people that wanted like dog custody. They literally wanted like visitation and custody and the things that we do for kids. But I think wisely, the bar cooler heads prevailed and said, this is going to create an entire species of litigation, like an entire World War III type litigation for people that are crazy about their animals. We can end up creating an entire cottage industry built around animal custody. That's probably not the best interest of Illinois citizens. So they came up with this hybrid concept, which meets most people's needs, in my opinion. And that is, okay, if people disagree on what should happen with the animals, the court can decide using a best interest of the animal standard. So that's what we now have. I know that Brittany's in Nevada. Is this a Nevada case? I'm not sure.
Not sure.
Okay. We don't need to check right now.
Either way.
But in any event, each state has its own rules about how animals should be dealt with respect to divorce. And so this explains how this stuff happens and who gets the responsibility of taking care of a pet. And so what we'll tell clients is there's no pet visitation. If you work out an arrangement to have a pet visit both people, that's up to you. The court won't enforce that. So that's how that works. But interesting story nevertheless, for sure. Rahul, what is this avalanching thing that you've got here in the show?
Avalanching thing is a dangerous new dating trend. We love our dating trends in this show.
We love our dating trends. Absolutely. What the heck is this one?
Something that has to do with Valentine's Day. And the article is very ominous. The title, it says singles warned of dangerous new dating trend ahead of Valentine's Day. Dangerous. Basically, it's a practice where lovelorn people throw out their regular dating non-negotiables such as age and location so that they can secure a companion before the most romantic day of the year. So they'll basically do anything that they need to do.
We just used to call that desperation.
Right. It's an avalanche, I guess, of desperation.
I love how now they give a name to something that's been going on for hundreds of years, but okay, we'll go with it. So that's dangerous new dating trends. What is this about?
It's about basically saying someone might say yes and tell you all the things you want to hear, but they're not really serious, but they're just more desperate to have somebody on Valentine's Day instead of otherwise being single. So if you're that one doing it, then you know what you're doing. But if you get swiped and you're like, oh wow, look at this guy or gal just swipe. This is great.
Yeah.
It may be that they're desperate and they're avalanching you.
And didn't we do a recent show where we talked about like the people that only like you because they want to live in your place? There was a
what was that called? I can't remember what that's called.
I can't remember. There's a new trend every show we do. There's something new going on. But there
or
was
the one where they never meet. You just only text.
I'm getting to that one actually. It's at the end. That's later in the show. We're going to talk about that one.
But you and I were talking about it offline. So yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Off the show we were talking about. But then there's the one you talked about, maybe just the last show, where they're just dating you to live on your couch.
It's like couch surfer.
Something like, but it had a clever term. Anyway, okay, watch out there, guys. You swiping, be careful. If it doesn't seem real, if it's right before Valentine's Day, be suspicious, turn those radars on, be careful. They may just want to not be alone on Valentine's. So be careful out there, folks.
Avalanching means you're more likely to settle for someone subpar and they won't make a long-term match.
Oh, snap.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, don't do that. You got to have your standards, folks. Maintain those standards.
Yes.
Your mom wants you to, so, watch out.
Exactly.
Okay. Next, you've got more, we love our dating experts, and you got some more good stuff on dating apps. What's this one?
So, got two more dating app stories, or you can get pointers or whatever. Pointer number one, we'll call it, what is the best time to be online to guarantee the perfect match? And by the way, they've given single people now the word, seen numerous articles use this term, singletons. So if you're a singleton, then you are part of this group.
Didn't they used to just call them singles?
Singles. Now they're singletons.
Okay.
So, and it's not a busy weekend.
We're staying abreast of all the news here. We're trying to keep you guys advised and on top of the latest. And so we learn right here along with you. So there you go.
Yes. So just a new term for your vernacular there. So it's not a busy weekend or a Saturday evening or something. Actually, experts at Bumble claim that Monday between 8 and 9 p.m. is the best time to go online to bag yourself a date.
Why is that?
It doesn't really say why.
Okay.
It just says that's what they've seen. I wonder if it's because they starting the week fresh. They're like, let's go find something or what? Not sure, but they say that's the best time and that the entire month of January is peak dating season on dating apps compared to the rest of the year. Outside of Mondays at 8 p.m., the best time to be on the app, at least in the UK, are Tuesdays at 9, Thursdays at 7, and Sundays at 5. Oddly specific times, honestly.
Yeah, very specific. But they know their peak user data. So basically what we're talking about is evening. Monday, Tuesday is big, right? And then Thursday. Right. And then Sunday. Okay. Well, I can sort of see that because hopefully you're going out Friday and Saturday night with the friends, the fellas, or somebody else for a hot date. And then on Monday night, you're thinking about the weekend coming up and you're trying to get something going. So maybe that's the deal. Okay. Interesting enough from the user data from our friends at Bumble. Very good. By the way, shout out. Always happy to accept a sponsorship, Bumble. Please consider us. Right. Just it's Raif at stglaw.com. Just shoot me an email. We're here for you. And so they say to guarantee the perfect match. That's when most people are online. Okay. Good to know. And then what else? You have some word to the wise, kind of a warning thing here.
Right. Last one. Pointer number 2 for people. When you go to a foreign country, especially like Colombia or something, maybe don't go on your dating apps. And if you do, don't go to some isolated places because apparently the U.S. Embassy in Bogota said some victims were drugged and robbed after meeting people on these apps. And 8 suspicious U.S. deaths in Colombia have recently occurred in Medellin, Cartagena, and Bogota, where U.S. tourism has picked up. And apparently the criminals use these apps to lure victims to public spaces where they can be assaulted, robbed, or killed. Or they say, hey, go to a hotel. There you are kidnapped and killed. For example, Zhang, Xiong, it says, was abducted and fatally stabbed over a dozen times by a group of men.
Oh my God.
And they said that foreign victims for these kinds of crimes could be higher than the figures suggest. Those who are not American. So they said, be very careful. And the same thing rings true for America. Be careful on these things. Anyone can go anywhere and do anything. So
the U.S. isn't exempt either from crimes. So One thing, we've talked about this in a previous show. We've talked about like being smart with these apps and vetting people, make them go on FaceTime so you can see who they are, make them show their ID when they're on video so you see that they are who they say they are, and then meet in a neutral location where you have an escape plan. So you've got a backup plan with one of your friends to say, hey, at X amount of time, if you don't hear from me, come pick me up or check on me. Always have a contingency plan, folks. You don't know what you're dealing with out there. And especially in a foreign country, when you are not on a resort property with security or you're in some unfamiliar area, you don't know what you're doing out there. So, one of the places we go to travel sometimes is Cancun. And if you're on those resorts, you generally have no concerns. If you are off property and you are in like downtown Cancun or some part, this is not a knock on Cancun. It's a great city. But if you don't know as an American or as a foreign tourist, you don't know the language necessarily. You don't know where you are in town, and you might not know the places to be. And there are stories of people who get into trouble wandering around late at night. And again, this is not special or magical to the U.S. versus Mexico. We also have dangerous places to go in the United States and in our town of Chicago here. But it's just being smart, being careful, having a backup plan, meeting in a neutral location, try daytime for coffee first, all that kind of stuff. And our friend Michael Banovac, Millionaire Date Doctor, who had a great episode with him recently, one of his great tips that I thought was great was he said the purpose of the first date is to just see if there's going to be a second date. When you keep that in mind, that lets you frame how casual the first date should be. And it should just be really, it's almost like you're just checking IDs and making sure they are who they say they are and deciding after a short time, yeah, I do want to meet this person again. And if it's not right, you bail out, jump in an Uber and you're gone. That's a great article. Thanks for bringing that one up. So another one I wanted to mention along these, there's some interesting stuff. Since we're talking about trends, I had a trend as well. And this one is Dexting, which you were just talking about, the dating app trend that sees us dating over text message. So it says, I looked up Dexting in an Urban Dictionary, which isn't exactly like the Oxford English Dictionary,
Science.
I understand. Yeah. There are different terms for this, but the term that has come up in online recently, it says, if you've ever been on a dating app, this is a story by Meg Walters from Glamour UK, Glamour magazine. They talk about ghosting. They talk about other digital dating trends. And we just talked about another one. The combination of dating and texting. Dexting is when people form strong bonds over text after meeting on a dating app. It feels like an actual relationship, but they never actually arrange a real date. So the term was coined by Amanda Bradford, dating expert and founder of dating app service The League. Shout out to The League. We talked about The League before in this constellation of dating apps, a lot of them owned by the same companies. But Dexting is a phenomenon that's come out of the dating app era. After you meet somebody in an app, you find yourself falling into a pattern of texting, maybe long conversations into the night, tapping away on your phone. Dexting is convenient, says Bradford. It can make you feel like you are in a relationship without having to actually do the work or spend the time to actually form a true connection. In a way, it's also safer, as you're less likely to get rejected if you don't put yourself out there in a real way, etc. The problem is it might give you the affirmation you're looking for, but it's not that healthy because it can be a form of just stringing somebody along and you're really never getting together. So years ago when my sons were texting with girls and like in high school and stuff, I would say, have you actually met this person? Have you talked to her? She's right across town. Why don't you just get in the car and go over and to her house and talk to her? And said, no, Dad, it's all texting now. You don't know how it is these days. I'm like, well, if you're just texting, that doesn't sound like a girlfriend to me. So
it's some like random dude on the other side of the country. You just get catfished.
It could be, yeah. But I mean, they claim they knew it was so-and-so from Instagram back then. There was on Insta and then later on Snapchat. And like, oh, I know it's what's her name from Snapchat. So, they say basically somebody can string you along forever talking about, a relationship with texting and it's not real. It says, Bradford recommends breaking the habit if you get into this pattern with somebody, and it can limit and stop you from forming real life romantic connection. Remember, dating demands energy from you, or, any interaction with people, whether it's friends, work, or romantic connections, demands your time and energy. Well, if you're pouring your energy into this person that you're never meeting, that's just texting you back, it's a fake relationship. You might as well be texting some AI chat app, basically. I guess it's fine to have a conversation with somebody here or there if you want somebody's support. But if you find somebody just hitting you up for texts all the time and getting your emotional support and you're not charging them for the privilege, you're basically a free counselor. You should seriously consider that as fake. And it's like, after a little bit of texting, this is advice from your old buddy Raif and Rahul. If you've been texting for a while, it's time to set up an in-person meet. And if they don't want to meet in person, It tells you everything you want to know. That's all you need to know. If we're not getting together for the first date that Mike Banovac, Millionaire Date Doctor, talks about, they don't want to date you. There was a book that came out years ago called He's Just Not That Into You. Book was a bestseller. It was a guy, this good looking guy wrote this book, is directed at women. And the whole idea was he saw all these attractive women that were in these relationships where they were getting blown off. They didn't know why things weren't progressing. And he said, and these women were shocked that nothing would advance. And he basically said, look, he's just not into you. If he was into you, you'd be going on date after date. This guy would be pursuing you, and this guy would want to get engaged, and he'd want to get married and all that stuff. And the reason that it's not progressing, he's just not that into you. Same thing with this Dexting thing. If they're texting all the time and they don't want to meet you, he or she is just not that into you. They've got some tips. They say, don't waste your time. A couple texts to sense their personality is fine, but don't dedicate hours to a screen before you meet in person. Great advice. That says try FaceTiming instead. Also great advice, like we said a minute ago. So that's the one on Dexting. I thought that was great. Glamour magazine. And
it reminds me of the old pen pal program that you had, you would write someone, you would never ever talk to them. You wouldn't even talk to them. You would just write them a letter. And now we're dating ourselves here because I don't even know if pen pals exist anymore, but nowadays I think they have pen pals in prison, and you can write them a letter and they will eventually write you back. Yeah, they would. And it's just, that's the relationship.
It's basically a big nothing eventually. Yeah. So, word to the wise, you're putting all this energy into a zero. So along those lines, this is kind of interesting. And this ties into something we've talked about before, which is how we call social media anti-social media on this show, because while it's a powerful tool for good, it can also be a powerful tool for nonsense, as we all know by looking at all the silly videos on there. It can also be a tool for dividing people. So one of the things with this Dexting situation is people have gotten to be friends with their keyboards, and they're getting scared of even seeing human beings IRL, right? In real life. People are finding it much easier to hide behind their phone than to go meet people. Meeting people can be a little scary. It's a little intimidating to put yourself out there. You have to dress up nicely and shave and get cleaned up and go out there and spend some money and some time and go meet somebody. But that's the actual human interaction we need. And that's how you build actual relationships. To this point, there's a Wall Street Journal story that came out a while ago by Tara Weiss. The title is, "We Now Need College Courses to Teach Young Adults How to Make Small Talk." This is something I witnessed. Yeah, something I witnessed when my guys were in high school. My sons are now in their 20s. Again, they would text these girls and guys, and they would not meet them in person. And there's all this long texting and Dexting, I guess, going back and forth, and no actual meeting people. So one of the things my ex-wife and I thought was important was socializing our boys and having them meet adults and talk with them and have conversations. And we had them meet lots of adults, and we treated them like adults in terms of making sure that we had normal conversations and avoiding baby talk and things with them. As a result, they became much more mature young men at an earlier age and could carry on a conversation with somebody. And my one son is in sales. My other son was in the military and is probably going back in the military. And those conversation skills have served them very well. The art of small talk and conversation is kind of a dying art. And also, I've said many times, people don't know how to date anymore. And a lot of that is because of this dating app culture and the hookup culture, where people like date in college and in high school. Kids hang out in gangs now, or not gangs like street gangs, but groups. And they go on dates and they go to parties in these gangs. So it's like 6 guys and 7 girls or whatever, and they hang out together. And maybe there's hookups going on here and there, but nobody's dating in the 1950s, 60s style of dating where we go steady. I had girlfriends in high school. I dated one girl for 6 or 7 months, one girl for 9 months, etc. That was my girlfriend. I didn't hang out in a crew. I went on dates with these girls. I went to movies. I went to maybe very old fashioned now. But the important thing was you were learning how to develop relationships with people. And I was building a one-to-one relationship with a young lady back then. And I would go out with, we go out with a couple of the guys and as friends and hang out with the guys. But in terms of dating, I learned how to make small talk, and you learn how to ask questions and get people to talk about themselves. And that is a dying art. By the way, I'll tell you the shortcut to having a conversation with anybody. Here it is. This is the punchline. I'll give you, this is 54 years of experience all in 1 second. This is worth, as I said in Star Wars, many Bothans died to bring you this information. And for you Star Wars nerds out there, the trick is when you don't know what else to say, ask questions. That's it. Just start asking questions. Where are you from? Tell me about your parents. What about your cousins? Do you know how to speak a language? All you do is ask questions. Yep. Next thing you know, you're in a conversation. So when you don't know what to say, ask a question, and you'll think of any
they'll ask
number
you a
of
follow-up question.
Yeah.
And you'll just go off on a tangent. And so it's, organic.
You'll never be tongue-tied if you remember that one piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
So that's...
No, absolutely.
You will never have an awkward moment because you just ask a question. And then people love to talk about themselves. This is true for sales or dating or anything else. And it's not bad. It's okay. It's human nature. When you ask them about themselves, they love to talk about themselves. And then what they will say when they walk away is they'll say they had an awesome conversation with you. They'll say you're awesome.
They talked about themselves.
Yeah. It always works. And,
absolutely.
Anyway, but that's what I taught my boys when they were younger, and my ex-wife did too, is just ask questions. But this professor of medieval literature at Rollins College, in this story, she has a job market boot camp class. Of course, this is like in the employment realm for these kids. She has a mixer with alumni to practice professional networking. And this applies to dating, which is why I wanted to talk about this story, and marriage too. For many of our students, the face-to-face conversations with strangers are more nerve-wracking than decoding Chaucer. And so it talks about students have trouble sleeping the night before this mixer and considered skipping it. So these kids are freaking out. If the question, tell me about yourself, triggers temporary amnesia, have like a prepared few things to say. They say that this person is actually teaching these skills. And a Caltech computer science lecturer is quoted in the story and said, when she started at the campus in 2016, she was surprised that at least a fifth of her students has spent 5 months looking for a job, not getting any interviews. These are Caltech people. These are like amazing students.
Best of the best tech institutes, yeah.
She asked to see copies of their cover letters. One began, "Hey, what's up, y'all?"
It's like that commercial. Was that? Remember that one?
That was very old school. Yes, exactly. And so employers see that, and they find that a lot of candidates have trouble carrying on even a basic conversation. And so they've started teaching these classes with these basic life skills, including carrying on small talk conversations. This whole story goes on to how this works. And there's a person who does academic research, and they describe that on campus, student interpersonal skills aren't as sharp as they used to be. So multiple folks have observed this. So it's just true. And those of you who have children, especially older kids who are in the dating scene or negotiating issues with friends, you probably see your kids typing away on phones, and you probably wonder why your kids aren't leaving the house. And it's because there's this keyboard screen thing where it's just safer and easier for people to not feel like they're putting themselves out there emotionally. And that's part of this Dexting thing, where they feel safe behind their screen, and they sort of feel like they're having a social relationship because they're playing online games and they've got their headphones on and they can hear their friends. They're talking to them, but it's kind of mindless chatter about the game and whatever. And then maybe they are texting each other for a long time every day. So it feels social, but it's lacking the true interpersonal vibe of seeing each other and reacting to each other's personalities like live and in person, and dealing with human beings in person. So anything we can do to teach people that or help reinforce that, I think is important, and getting people away from their phones and back to meeting people like Nick Gray does. Nick Gray's that author who has that book called The 2-Hour Cocktail Party, where he's talking about the lost art of having these social interactions. Right. And he's all about rebuilding those and making people meet each other. These things are so important in keeping our society, cohesive. And we had so many structures in our culture to do that, like church and church groups. And we had, the town hall, and we had these small towns where we really had all these structures in place to create that social interaction. And we didn't have television, and we didn't have air conditioning. So when there's a movie called Avalanching, which is about an immigrant family coming to the United States, and initially the family's all together. It's a phenomenal movie. It's by Neil Simon, wrote it, directed it. It's amazing. And it's a great story. It's a great American story about an immigrant family coming to America back, I think, the 1920s. There's no TV, there's no air conditioning, and the family all lives in one place, all the generations. And so they're very close. And as progress hits the United States, they get a radio, but then they're all sitting around the radio together, listening to the radio, but they're not talking to each other. Then they get a TV, and they're all sitting around TV, but they're not talking to each other. They're eating TV dinners, and they're not making food together. And then they used to sit on the porch together on the hot nights, but then they get air conditioning, and other people build all these tract homes. And now the family doesn't need to live in one home. They can all afford a house. So they split up. They all have their own TVs, and they all have their own TV dinners, and they all have their own air conditioning. So, when I was a kid, we had a place in Michigan that had a porch, and we didn't have air conditioning. And we had a porch in our place in Illinois while I was growing up. We weren't poor or whatever, but we just didn't have it. And when it was a hot night, we'd sit on the porch, and the kids would run around on the block and meet all the other kids. And the parents would talk, and everybody knew everybody. And we're losing that with the internet. We gained a lot with the internet, and we've lost something. So anyway, it's just to say there's something to keep track of here. And I don't know the perfect answer. We don't know, but the article points up a problem, and so does Dexting and these dating apps. And there are things we can do to try to interact with people. Let's go where the people actually are, and interact with them, and you won't regret it. Okay, this leads to another thing I wanted to talk about in the show today, which is postnups, prenups, and poison pills. What are we talking about? Prenup, of course, is an agreement you reach before a marriage, which deals with division of property or who keeps what, and it deals with who's got what non-marital property and isolates the non-marital property typically, or what we call non-community or separate property in a community property state. You can cover how your marital stuff or your community property is divided. You can deal with who pays for attorney's fees. You can deal with health care. You can deal in a prenup with alimony or maintenance. You can't deal with child support or kid-related issues. We've talked about this before in previous shows. By the way, the prenups are governed in almost every state, if not every state, by the Uniform Prenuptial or Premarital Agreement Act, which has been adopted by, if not all the states, most of the states, almost all. And the statute defines what they need to include and basically what prenups can do and can't do. They're enforceable. We've talked about this many times before. They actually work. We've been big proponents of prenups here. So what is a postnup? A postnuptial agreement is an agreement we enter into after we're married for a number of reasons, but typically it's to forestall a divorce or to anticipate a potential divorce or prevent one, I guess. It does some of the things of a prenup. One thing I should mention, big difference between prenup and postnup is a prenup doesn't require any consideration, meaning the prenup can be quite what you might say one-sided. And the only thing that's being exchanged for the prenup, the only thing that makes it valid is the marriage. So the marriage actually has to happen. Prenup doesn't count if you don't get married. All you're getting is the marriage in exchange for the terms in the prenup. The only thing you can do to avoid the terms of the prenup is not get married. So that's your option. So with a postnup, you're already married and you're already protected by the marriage and dissolution or divorce laws of the state where you live. And the person who wants the postnup has to basically buy the postnup in exchange for valuable consideration. So what does that mean? It means a postnup can't be one-sided by definition. And the postnup will be evaluated for fairness or equity at the time the court will look at it and decide if it's litigated. If you actually file for divorce and use the postnup, the court will judge whether it's equitable and may reopen the postnup and change things around if the court doesn't like the postnup, it doesn't think it's fair. So when we counsel folks who come in and they say, well, I'm in a hurry, we're getting married, can I just do a postnup after? Because it sounds like prenup, postnup, like I just do it after, right? The answer is wrong. There's a lot more required in a postnup. The postnup, I should say, is judged very differently. And the court can mess around with postnups much more than they will with prenups. So word to the wise, don't think a postnup is just a prenup after the marriage. It's very, very different. Basically, in a postnup, a couple differentiators. One is a prenup just tells you what happens in the event of a divorce, or at least the terms that we can control, like we talked about, division of property and debt, who's paying for the thing with attorney's fees if you want to cover that, how you're doing with medical, alimony, or maintenance. The child issues, of course, are left open. A postnuptial agreement actually has two component parts. One is what happens if you get divorced, similar to prenup, alimony, property, that, those other things. But the other piece that's important is what happens when we stay married. So while we're married, how do we govern ourselves? And this is where what you're buying comes in, because when you buy the postnup, so to speak, you've got to basically give the other person valuable consideration. Well, what does that mean? What we're talking about is basically you're purchasing whatever you're getting on your side of the postnup. You have to buy with a fair trade in assets and debt. So you're almost pre-doing the divorce in a lot of ways. So either in the deal, if in terms of the divorce, you have to show there's a fair division of assets and liabilities, and that the maintenance is fair in line with your state's law and the available pool of assets and debt and all the income. But a lot of folks end up dividing assets for the purpose of the marriage itself and create some non-marital property in the postnup. And they talk about how do we pay expenses in the meantime, like assuming we stay married, what are we doing? Awarding some assets to the other person that they're going to keep. They'll be designated as their non-marital property. So two important components of the postnup. One, what do we do while we're still married? Two, what do we do if we get divorced? Postnup is a very different animal. Okay, I know that's a lot of introduction, but it's important to lay the groundwork because we've got a case here with a postnup that has a poison pill. And what does the poison pill mean here? In this case, this is Maryland. So remember, every state is different and every state's laws are different. So this involves adultery. So in this Maryland case, there was a postnuptial agreement and a resulting divorce. And this case went all the way from the trial court to the state appellate court, which is the middle level court, and the state's highest court, which is the Maryland Supreme Court. So we've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. In the United States, we have a parallel court system. We have a state court system, trial court, appellate court, Supreme Court. and we have the federal system with the trial court, appellate court, or courts of appeal, and the U.S. Supreme Court. They are parallel and they have different jobs. Divorce cases are handled in state court. So in this case, the divorce case was handled at the trial court, and part of this postnuptial agreement issue was appealed to the appellate court. That decision was then appealed to the Supreme Court, which made the final decision. So what's interesting about this? The interesting thing is, in this case, basically, I'll make it short. The guy got in trouble with his wife because he cheated on her during the marriage. And so it talks about the situation here, and it says, I'm going to scroll to the gist, the factual background. These folks were married in 2006 in DC. They have college degrees. One of them made about 130 to 200,000 a year. The other person made 70 to 122 a year. The petitioner has a wealthy family who left him a substantial inheritance. And sometime into the marriage, the respondent in the case discovered petitioner was involved in an affair. The parties separated. So she was uncertain if she wanted to remain in the marriage, but the parties worked towards building trust and ascertaining the reason for the infidelity. They talked to a priest and a therapist. Good. We always talk about counseling and talking to professionals and seeing if the marriage can be saved. And so they did the right things. And here's a good reason for a prenup. Upon respondent's request, petitioner 1 provided her with the passwords to his financial and email accounts. So, hey, full disclosure. 2, transferred a portion of his inheritance into an account held with respondent as tenants by the entirety. So he said, here's some money from me in a joint account. 3, converted to Catholicism. So she pretty much said, hey, we're going to have to get religious here and get serious. That's her right to ask for that. Sold the car he used with the affair partner. Okay, that probably was bad vibes. Got rid of that.
Yeah, she didn't want to sit in that car anymore.
Yep. And 5, underwent a vasectomy. Okay. Sort of an interesting tidbit there. All right. During the autumn of 2014, respondent introduced the idea of a postnup to the petitioner. She probably said, hey, if you want to stay married, we need a postnup, which would give her peace of mind, feeling like if this plane crash lands, if this guy does this again, I want to know how this is going to be set up. I need to feel a level of security. And I've had cases just like this where a postnup comes out of infidelity and the parties say, okay, I'll stay married on the condition that I know exactly how this is going and I've got some safety measures plugged into this deal. So here's the situation. So they hired attorneys. They wisely consulted an estate planning attorney and a divorce attorney. And we always recommend that because there are really two different worlds involved in the postnup process. And you've got some estate planning components and you've got some divorce components, and you need two different lawyers to really consult with to do this properly. Because usually you have to build a different estate plan when you've got this going on or modify it. And you've got your postnup issues. One thing we always warn people is prenups and postnups are not estate planning tools. That is stuff about when you die. Well, or if you live and you're in bad shape and can't speak for yourself, like living will stuff, right? Or do not resuscitate orders. Those are estate planning things. Those are not divorce lawyer things. So
you're like planning your estate, right? As it sounds.
Exactly. And some of those components, like in a postnup, part of what your spouse may say is, hey, if you die, I want X, Y, and Z provided for. Totally understandable. So part of what they want, you can outline in the postnup, but it needs to be created by an estate planning attorney who has a lot of experience and understands how this works to do it right. Don't legal zoom this thing, people. It's way too much money on the line. Don't try to save a buck on this. You will regret it. And you're not spending a ton of money on the estate planning lawyers. They are worth every penny. So they bounced this draft back and forth. Well, guess what? The agreement contained irrelevant. So the respondent drafted this thing up with her attorney and then sent it to the petitioner. And guess what it had? A poison pill. The poison pill said that he would have to pay her $5 million if he had engaged in adultery and related acts. They reviewed the draft line by line and the petitioner topped it. So the petitioner saying, hey, you can trust me. He added $2 million on top and said, make it 7. So good. He wants to show his good faith and he anticipated you inherit about $12 million from his father's estate. Maybe he wasn't so worried about the extra $2 million because he was going to get 12 more.
Right.
Okay.
I was really worried about it.
Hey, better than 5, right? She's getting a few more bucks. So the provision, I won't bore you with the details on the provision. You can look at the link and actually look at the case. It's very interesting in the bio or in our description of this thing. So they break down the assets. They talk about all this stuff. So I won't bore you with this, but this is the juicy part is there's a poison pill. If he cheats on her, she gets $7 million. So here's what happens. Of course, things don't go well. Here's what happens. They sign the agreement and he has another affair. Womp womp. Okay. Maybe not a shocker. In 2018, so a few years later, he has another affair. The parties separated in April 2019 after he said to her, I don't want to be married to you anymore. Okay. Shocker. The guy's like cheating on her left and right. Now, trial court, what happens? They go to trial court, grounds, she files for divorce, grounds of adultery. No surprise, she requested that the circuit court incorporate the postnup into the divorce case, which is what happens, and enforce it, especially the lump sum provision. Petitioner filed an answer and counterclaim and argued the agreement was void, as was unconscionable and against public policy. Oh, now you tell us, after you signed it and you have zillions of dollars, you can afford attorneys, but you sign it and you're cool with it. Now you're saying it's unconscionable and unenforceable.
Maybe that's why he signed it. He's like, you know what? Make it 7. I'm not paying you a dime anyway.
Super cynical, maybe true, but here it gets interesting. Circuit Court had several hearings on these issues between November 2020, December 9, 2020. Witnesses testified about the lump sum provision. Respondent, that's the lady, testified she did not calculate the initial $5 million provision. She further testified agreement memorialized petitioner's promise to remain faithful. Its terms put petitioner's money where his mouth was. Respondent asserted she accepted the $2 million increase to the provision because petitioner proposed it. Hey, come on, this guy, he's the guy that said $2 million more, not me. Petitioner's friend described the lump sum provision as a bad boy clause. Well, that's one way to put it. Ms. Day testified she had advised petitioner against agreeing to the lump sum provision. And so in this person's view, the lump sum provision was intended to be prohibitive so that petitioner would not engage in the adultery again because he would know there was $5 million penalty out there. And the person testified petitioner wished to increase it to $7 million to make it that much more clear he really wouldn't do this again as a showing of good faith. Ms. Day, as the attorney, referred to the lump sum as a penalty during negotiations because that's what it looked like to her at that point. She asserted, however, the term penalty was not a legal term of art. Now, that's important later, and I don't want to get the audience too tied up into this, but there is such a thing in breach of contract cases as liquidated damages clauses, where they say, well, if you breach this agreement in a business relationship, you have to pay us X dollars. And one of the bedrock principles of contract law, to not make this too much like law school, is that liquidated damages clause cannot serve as a penalty. They are a replacement for screwing around with all the litigation required to calculate accurate damages. So they're supposed to bear a reasonable relation to actual damages. So the argument that this guy makes is this is a penalty and therefore is inequitable and unenforceable. It is just a punishment. And so you can't enforce it against me.
Right.
And it said the lump sum provision was a penalty, but was enforceable. I apologize. The circuit court relied on a case. Again, this is Maryland, where the court noted that many postnups attempt to use financial rewards and penalties to create incentives during a marriage that constrain the behavior of the spouses. In the court's view, the case stood for the proposition that spouses may include adultery penalties. In postnups, the circuit court saw that the jurisdictions that have rejected adultery penalties have held that those undermine no-fault divorce laws in those states. But they said Maryland is still a fault-based state. Now in Illinois, we are a no-fault state.
Oh, okay.
And
Interesting.
we don't penalize adultery in this state. So the states that have held that you can't do this are states where it's a no-fault state and you can't punish for adultery. Therefore, they have said these are unenforceable. Maryland doesn't do that. So the trial court said, enforceable. Well, the mister didn't like that, so he appealed to the appellate court. And the circuit court said, although the decision to agree to the $7 million penalty may have been improvident, it's quite the choice of words, the penalty was not unconscionable. The circuit court noted that the lump sum likely would be unconscionable if an individual with a net worth of $50,000 earning $40,000 per year had agreed to the provision, so that the number was so outsized that it would never make any sense. But in this case, the guy's multi-millionaire, and it kind of fits in the scheme of how much money this guy has and stuff. So the court thought it was okay. So he granted a divorce judgment. Both parties appealed. She had stuff she didn't like about it. So the appellate court affirmed the circuit court's decision and remanded for a child support decision. So we're not going to worry about that. Let's cut to the chase here. So the appellate court they went to the appellate court. So he didn't like that. So go to the appellate court, held penalty provisions are permissible in postnuptial agreements because such agreements are designed to discourage and penalize conduct that would undermine a marriage, such as adultery. Now, that's really not, in Illinois, I think this would be held to be unenforceable because we don't have fault divorce in Illinois. Postnups are really meant to create a controlled landing rather than penalizing conduct. So I don't know that it would stand up in Illinois. So the appellate court also found that underlying case to be instructive. So then basically the appellate court upheld the trial court, and obviously the husband didn't like that, so the ex-husband, so he appealed to the Supreme Court. So long story short, the Supreme Court agreed that essentially this was allowable, that this postnuptial was enforceable, that in this case, they agreed with that holding in the underlying case, and they said, basically the term penalties refer to provisions that operate to a detriment of a party, and that in this case, the lump sum provision transferring $7 million up to the value of a 50% share of specified marital assets, that it wasn't an undue amount. It was in reasonable relation to the total value of the assets to be divided. That it made sense in the grand scheme of things, sort of like the trial court said. So court held that the agreement is valid and enforceable unless the agreement is unconscionable or the byproduct of fraud, duress, mistake, or undue influence, very much like what we'd see in Illinois. So the court felt that the lump sum provision was appropriate. And they felt that they said that those contract provisions about liquidated damages, where we talked about how you can't just have a penalty, they're not in line with divorce law. And it's not the correct framework for evaluating the lump sum provision. They see it as an allocation of marital assets based on a party's conduct. So they find that it's in line and not conflicting with the classic law that says you can't have liquidated damages in a contract. So long story short, the court upheld this so-called poison pill and agreed that that amount should be awarded to the wife in that case. So depending on your state, these poison pills may be enforceable. And we know that these exist in prenups. I know we've talked about these in previous shows where poison pills have been baked into prenups, and depending on your state, they may well be enforceable. So it's something to be aware of.
And the most oftentimes you see it in the fashion of, if you contest this and lose, you have to pay all my attorney's fees. That's the most common poison pill that we see.
That's true. And that's exactly right. And we have heard of infidelity poison pills. We haven't done the homework on that in Illinois, so I can't speak to that offhand. But in other states, those may be enforceable. So something to watch out for. Tying in to the previous story, Rahul, we've got some interesting stories here. The 16 most adulterous countries in the world. And they've got some research here. Yeah. So this is from insidermonkey.com. Hat tip to those guys. Some pretty interesting. Here's the combination of survey sources. So keep this in mind as you're listening to this. It looks like in the article, they have consolidated survey responses from 3 different sources. So source number 1, First for Lawyers, the number 4 lawyers, which surveyed 2,000 British people, saying 57% of individuals would choose to divorce their partners in the event of an affair being discovered. Some of them stated their decision would depend on the circumstances. In a separate survey, 56% of participants believe humans are naturally inclined toward monogamy. Okay. Meanwhile, among the same respondents, 19% openly admitted to engaging in infidelity. That's interesting. They just said it in a survey.
To admit in a survey?
Yeah, really. Another research is conducted by Pew Research Center, well-respected, examined 40 countries globally, including Australia, Japan, Britain, France, Spain, and Canada, among others, revealed that 12% of the respondents perceive infidelity to be morally acceptable. Okay, so only 12% think it's morally acceptable. All right, understood. Now, here's the also very important survey by the condom manufacturer Durex, which you wonder why they're conducting surveys. They surveyed 29,000 people from 36 countries. That's a pretty big survey. Series of interviews revealed Nigeria has the most unfaithful women in the world at 62%, followed by Thailand at 59%. Why are these ladies admitting this? Okay. Additionally, 39% of women in Malaysia confessed to betraying their partners, while Russian women ranked 4th with 33%, Singaporeans 5th place with 19%. Thailand, most unfaithful men in the world. Let's go through the methodology. I guess they blended this stuff together to come up with the rankings. And we'll hit the highlights for you folks here. So they've got the top 16. We're going to start at the bottom and we'll work our way up. All right. Drum roll, please. We've got 16 most adulterous countries in the world. Number 16 comes in at Canada. It's cold up there, man. Okay. Number 15, Japan. So they talked about, apparently in the episode CNN docuseries about sex and love around the world in 2019. They actually centered around Japan and its dating culture. Many Japanese wives admitted they seek satisfaction and intimacy from other men, confessing they lack intimacy with their husbands. Okay. Coming in at number 14, USA. You would think USA is like, for some reason, I would think USA is higher up on this list, but it is not. Infidelity represents one part of a larger issue within the U.S. The country as a whole has been observed to have a dysfunctional family system with the highest divorce rates worldwide. Higher up on this list, number 12, Russia. Okay. Number 11, Nigeria. Number 7, Italy. Italian men and women have an average 50% combined cheating rate. That means half of their population is being involved in intimate affairs.
With the other half?
That's an interesting question. That gets through the numbers. Who knows? We need to talk to some experts. Spain at number 5. A change made in the Spanish law in May 1978 excluding adultery as a criminal offense in the Spain penal code, so in their criminal code. It says this might have been a big factor in Spain's rising case of infidelity. I don't know, maybe just people admitting to it now. Number 4, the UK. Apparently Ashley Madison, a site that helps people, they say book an affair. I don't know if that's how you really put it. Says it's accumulated 1.1 million members in the UK since its public appearance in 2010. Number 3, Germany. Number 2, France. I mean, we know there's a lot of true love in France, so that's probably what's going on. Number one, Thailand, which I would not have expected.
That is the one coming out of left field there.
Yeah. In another survey conducted by condom manufacturer Durex, Thai men were identified as the most unfaithful in the world. According to a report compiled by Statista, an astonishing 56% of married individuals in Thailand confess to engaging in extramarital affairs. Now, if 56% of people admit it, there's got to be a bunch of people that don't admit it. So it's probably much worse than that. So you wonder, there's all kinds of things. We have cultural differences, religious differences, all these things. So it's hard to judge. We don't know. In other countries, it's much more culturally acceptable to have relationships outside of marriage. So I think we kind of know that generally. So tying into that, and also from the same source, 15 countries with the most unfaithful husbands in the world. We've got pretty much in line with what you've seen. So we've got Japan around 14, America at 12. So sort of in a similar position. Russia 8, skipping ahead, Spain 6, Italy 4. So kind of in the same position. So we have the most infidelity, and then we have most cheating husbands. They didn't judge between male and female in the previous article. So this kind of ties in. So the top 3 are Germany, UK, and France for the top 3 cheating husbands in the world. 55% of French men acknowledge being unfaithful to their spouse or significant other. Cheating is so common in Paris that French flower shops advertise, "Don't forget your mistress." Lovely.
Wow.
Very good. I was in a seminar one time, in a divorce lawyer seminar, and only a joke that divorce lawyers, I guess, think is funny. One of the speakers said something about Valentine's Day. So you can get a gift for your wife or your girlfriend, or your wife and your girlfriend. The guy said, a rim shot. There you go. So to close this show, I wanted to mention there is a company called Chicago E-Boats, and they offer boat rentals in the Chicago River. This is along the lines of, I guess, things to do with your wife or your girlfriend, folks, especially with Valentine's Day coming up. You have to be awfully brave out there to be doing this because it's 0 degrees. It's freezing out there. But Chicago now has little electric hot tub boats that basically look like a hot tub that floats with a little roof and a little electric motor. So if you're looking for a romantic interlude on the lovely Chicago River, you can rent one of these things and motor around with it. Now, the challenge probably isn't driving around in the boat sitting in the hot tub. The challenge is getting into the thing in the freezing cold and getting out of the thing when you're wet in the freezing cold. That's the part that's probably rough. But shout out to Chicago E-Boats for being creative and trying to get people in those boats in the winter when normally you're getting nobody to go out in a boat in the Chicago River. So
yeah.
There you go. But the picture's hilarious. There's like 2 people having drinks in this hot tub boat. And I'm guessing they took this picture in the summer, but I read that they offer these things in the off season too. So something to do for a hot date, maybe not so hot date. So everybody enjoy. Thanks for listening. Like, follow, share, subscribe. Please review the show. Let us know you like the show. Let us know what you want to hear about. We're here for you. We do this for you. And give us comments on your thoughts about these things. We know some of these topics are controversial. We don't shy away from that stuff. We're happy to talk about it. Let us know what you like, don't like. Tell your friends. Share this stuff with friends and family. Please let us know what you think. We love it. Take care. Have a good one.